Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning. What was the temperature at your house this morning?
-7.
Yeah. Live on the way to.
It's invigorating. Welcome to day 2 of Winter Fishtrap. We had such an inspiring talk last night from Dr. Christine Hoover. And for those of you who were here, I'm sure you were thinking about it all night long and brought that energy today. And then welcome to all of you folks who showed up this morning, got out of bed, got your car started, came down, or even walked over like Mary Swanson. There are snacks back here, and coffee as well as up here. And I also want to welcome all you folks attending via Zoom, virtually. We're happy to have you here again this morning. We're in for a full day of discussions and conversations, and I'm happy to have you all a part of it. A quick thing, this panel is titled Working Together When We Don't Agree. And we have a very interesting group of local folks, and I'll let Shannon introduce everybody, but I just do one more time, since there's some new folks here who want to acknowledge the people who made Winter Fishtrap possible. Our sponsors are Eagle Cap Vacation Rentals, the Wallowa Valley Center for Wellness, the Nez Perce Wallowa Homeland, Wallowa Resources, Kokanee Inn, Wallowa County Chamber of Commerce, Eagle Cap Wellness, and the Nature Conservancy PNC. So thanks to all those folks for helping make this possible, and to all of you for having the curiosity and courage to come and be a part of these conversations. So with that, I will introduce Shannon McNerney. Take it away, Shannon.
Where am I going? Good morning, everybody, and again, thank you for joining us. What I wanted to do this morning, I think I started with Chantay. It was my first conversation, and I sent her an email. I said, "Can you hang out with us at Winter Fishtrap?" And what we wanted to do was, I picked 3 folks from the local community, people who I think we would all agree are, for those folks that aren't here, you will find out more about, or aren't local here, you will find out more about these folks, but that are definitely leaders in our community, and represent organizations that have to deal with wide swaths of people who don't always like each other, who don't always like the people that they're talking to, and sometimes we don't like them either. So there it is. Let's be fair, we're all human, right? That's part of the thing, right? Did we start out with this? We're all human beings. So what we wanted to do today was look at these 3 different organizations and their perspectives. There's some fascinating stories from my point of view with each of these groups. But also give you 3 different viewpoints from the local community. So what we're gonna do is have a conversation. How many of you have been in panel discussions where you feel like if it doesn't end soon, somebody's gonna have to get a gun drawn and put it right here? Those aren't my favorite kinds. Plus my pressure. Yeah, thank you. So what we want to do today is, my goal is that as you're sitting here during this panel discussion, you feel like you're sitting at a really cool dinner table in somebody's living room and hearing a good conversation. So there are going to be some questions that we're going to talk to each other. We're also going to let them toss questions to each other and do some follow-up. And then at the end, we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A if anybody has questions. I will say this now, and I'm going to say it again at the end. A question starts with who, what, why, where, when, and how. If you want to stand up and talk about your experiences with this particular issue, I'm going to invite you to do that at 11 or at 10:45 when we're done. The 10:30, okay? So this is just to honor the space. Also, we are gonna invite our folks that are watching on Zoom. Our good friend Janice is monitoring the chat. So at the end, we have a Q&A. If you have a question, you will be well represented. You also, Zoom folks, you can unmute yourselves and talk to each other. We will not hear you. So please feel free to comment to each other if you need to, although you might check with your neighbor. They may not like that. So I'm looking right now, it looks like we've got about 15 people online. So thank you to all those folks. So let's get started. Nils, Christoffersen, raise your hand so we all know who you are. He's the best man in the corner. Nils is the Executive Director of Wallowa Resources. His diverse experience in place-based natural resource management from working around the world, including ranching in Australia, farming in Israel, and fishing and forestry in Norway. I can relate. Is passionate about working landscapes and the role of rural communities in their stewardship. Nils is a graduate of both Williams College and Oxford University. Really? Seriously? Okay. And has served on many local and national boards, including the National Commission on Science for Sustainable Forestry, Oregon Board of Forestry, and World Forest Center. You have been ED of Wallowa Resources for how long now?
17 years.
Wow. There you go. A lot of what we have in our community is thanks to his work and work with Wallowa Resources, so thank you. Beth Estock. Beth has I love her bio. I'm just gonna read this because I love this. Beth has a complex relationship with the church. She's the progeny, yeah, I was gonna say, some of us can relate to this. This I can relate to. She's the progeny of a Catholic and Protestant marriage in rural Pennsylvania. No problem there. When she finally professed her allegiance to Methodism, her Catholic grandmother told her she was going to hell. I can also relate to that. Being the inquisitive type, Beth took a few theology classes in college to find out that if her grandmother was right. Okay. That experience and her love of church camps compelled her to go to seminary and enter the university. I'm just sitting here through the corner of my eye going, Chantay, so what the heck are you gonna do to me? She's pastored churches in Georgia and Oregon for many years before she finally broke up with the church. She also worked with Wallowa Lake Camp as the family program director for 6 summers. Now she is a master certified leadership coach and a meditative yoga instructor. She's written 2 books and co-hosts a podcast called Church is Changing. Most recently, she followed her bliss back to Wallowa County, and we are so glad she did, and has fallen in love with church again as the pastor of the Joseph United Methodist Church. So welcome back. Chantay. You know what, I have to say quickly, Chantay is the very first person, I'm no joke. When I first got here, I think my first full day, and literally my first full day in the county, there was some event at Joseph Center, and Chantay was the panelist. And I remember sitting in the back of the room going, oh, good Lord, I'm in trouble. She's so one of the people I respect most in the county, so that's really true. Chantay has served as the executive director for the amazing Wallowa Valley Center for Wellness since 2015. You only beat me by a few months. I did not know that. She holds a master's degree in psychology with a child, couple, and family emphasis and a bachelor's degree in business administration. Chantay's history in mental health field includes working with children in inpatient psychiatric unit at Children's Hospital, private practice administrator of Wallowa River House and a residential treatment facility for people with severe and persistent mental illness, outpatient mental health clinician, and the Wallowa Valley Center for Wellness is operation officer from 2013 to 15. She believes that everyone can discover improved health mentally, physically, and emotionally by creating communities and environments that support this. And again, those of us that live here know that the work she's doing, the work of her staff has made a tremendous impact. We are very fortunate to have Center for Wellness here. See that in the group?
No, I can.
All right, so please welcome our panelists. Thank you. Okay. I want to start out with the premise of the event, which is Can We Talk? So I'm going to start with you, Nils, because you're masked in the corner and mysterious. So why are you here? Why is this topic important to you?
Well, this is really part and parcel of my whole story in Wallowa County, and really in that bio she read in terms of my passion around communities connected to place. And when I got here, I actually got here in 1999, and so 25 years ago, as the first field program manager for Wallowa Resources. Wallowa Resources was created by some of the people in this room and with backing from the county commissioners in response to the loss of a lot of jobs related to forestry. And there was big divisions in the community back then, a lot of fear and anger, some hate, and a recognition that somebody needed to try to pull not one person, but collectively, the community needed to regroup and find a positive path forward from the crisis that they were facing. And many things were put in place, including the decision to create Wallowa Resources, a community-based nonprofit with a local board that would really work with landowners, local government, local businesses, as diverse a group of stakeholders as possible, the Nez Perce tribe, and try to figure out sort of what does the future look like now that our largest landowner, the National Forest System, the U.S. Forest Service, has dramatically changed their management priorities. And the core economy of forestry and forest products had changed and maybe changed forever. And so I got here with essentially with 7 years of experience in Southern Africa and the other places Shannon mentioned, all working in similar communities, but I didn't know anything about Wallowa County and I had no relationships here. So the board did a brilliant thing, and Diane Daggett really encouraged it. She said, I don't expect you to do anything for 6 months except talk to people. And I had many kitchen coffee conversations, pickup truck conversations, terminal gravity, Boston Tavern conversations, walks in the woods, to just hear as many different voices about sort of where we were, what their hopes and values were for the future, and try to figure out what was I hearing from all these different voices that was something Wallowa Resources could do that would be helpful. Not independently solve the problem, because we weren't big enough to do that, right? But do something that was constructive. And that really is kind of the ethos of the organization and sort of what drives me is community building around a vision of rural communities. Central value really is as stewards of America's natural resources, of these beautiful landscapes. And when I say rural communities, anytime I speak of rural communities or people of place, I mean the people that are here today, and obviously the Native Americans that have a long history here and may not be as present in these landscapes as they should be and were. But that's what drives us. And I've seen over the course of the 25 years I've been here, kind of, it's gone up and down in terms of in terms of this community building and cohesion around a vision of who we are and what we want to do. And right now we seem fractured, and I think it's important that we have these conversations in small groups, in larger groups, and then hopefully sort of pull back together across the whole county to reconfirm what's important to us and how we can work together.
Thank you. Chantay, I'm going to ask you the same question. So you've been here, you've been in this position for a long time. You grew up in the county.
Yeah.
And how is this topic relevant to you? How would you, can we talk? And what is it? How does it look like at Center for Wellness in your own life?
Yeah, I was thinking as Nils was talking, my family moved here in 1979 and I was 7 years old, and the county looked a lot different than it does today, believe it or not. Joseph was like a two-shop town. So I was thinking about, the work at the Wellness Center, and really talking is our widget. It's what we do. It's, what we try to facilitate with many, many groups of people, with individuals. And I think over time, especially since COVID, it's become more and more and more challenging and complex. Nils asked me this morning, he said, "Good morning, Chantay, how are you?" And I'm like, "Okay." And he said, "How's work?" And I said, "It's so complex right now." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, it's just so complicated. Everything is so complicated. Every single conversation, every single interaction from the state to the local folks is complicated. Why?" I've been trying to sit here and think about the why. And that's, being a therapist, the why is really important to me. So, trying to deconstruct this a little bit. I'm not really sure, Brene Brown, 5 years ago, I listened to her at a national conference for mental health and well-being. And as a sociology researcher, she said, there's something really odd happening in the world, in America today. And she said, I'm noticing that people are dividing themselves into small factions of folks that only believe in what you believe or what they believe. And the groups are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And she said, it's really interesting because it feels like we are looking at the psyche such that we can no longer tolerate debate. We can no longer tolerate a no. We can no longer tolerate well, I don't believe the way you believe. And she said, where is this going to get us? And she was really wrestling with this question 5 years ago before the pandemic. And I've thought about that speech, I've thought about that talk 1,000 times since then in the last 5 years. And I've only seen that prediction grow more and more and more true. And so even when I think about it at work, I can no longer sit across the table from someone, one of my employees, and say, I'm really having difficulty with your job performance right now. I'm struggling with this. We need to come up with some solutions without many times a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, a lot of negative feedback from the person sitting across the table from me. And I think it's very interesting. I'm not saying they're a bad person. I'm saying their job performance isn't that great. Let's get some tools. Let's get some education. Let's get some training. Let's, get you some resources so that you feel more comfortable in your position. And somehow that conversation, that intent of my hope to help this person grow emotionally, mentally, maturity, in their own job development is lost. So it's something that I too have been really struggling with and am very curious about. So I'm excited to be on this panel today because I think this is a really worthwhile conversation to be having.
Thank you, Chantay. Beth, same question to you. Again, you're representing a different, you're not dealing with the number of employees, say that Chantay is or other things, but you also are dealing with a wide swath of the community and also part of a church that I know is struggling with, coming together or splitting apart. So how is this topic important to you? What does it mean?
First of all, I have to say that as a Protestant minister, it's a very different approach than maybe you would think of as a Catholic priest or other people who really embrace that priestly function of I am here to be the conveyor of the sacraments. In the Protestant tradition, particularly in the Methodist tradition, as a pastor, you do have that priestly function, but you also have the function of being a community organizer. And building community is pretty much what a lot of the work is. And again, during the pandemic, I coach a lot of ministers, and a lot of really high capacity people were quitting because there was such nastiness happening within the church. I think that we have to be able to grow our social skills, our emotional intelligence skills, and church is a really beautiful place to do that and to practice that and to remember what that is. It used to be that in a church, you would take communion with somebody who was a different political persuasion or had a very different experience than you. But even our churches are becoming divided anymore. And okay, well, what flavor of a community do you have? And I'll come to that because I feel safe to come to that. So this sense of how can we expand the conversation and build a sense of deep listening and be able to take that pause you were talking about yesterday to say, okay, what's happening within me? And how can I then step into a sense of greater compassion for the other? So this is really, really important work, and I'm so grateful that Fishtrap is leading the way with this.
Well, we're part of the conversation, I'll say that. There's lots of folks that have been doing this work a lot longer than we have, so. Nils, I want to come back. I think Chantay, you said something interesting about the smaller and smaller groups of folks. I'm curious, even within your organization and the staff and the volunteers and the board, are you seeing something similar? Are you seeing something with the folks that you work with? How is this disconnect and the fracturing that you talked about directly impacting Wallowa resources, or is it?
Yeah, no, it's.
Yeah, you didn't think about it. I know, we all know each other, so it's not about that.
It definitely impacts us. I don't know if anybody went to any of our public meetings.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
So, you know, some of it is, one of the things I was reflecting on before I came in was that, you know, communities are particularly in this day and age, and it's probably not true for every community, but Wallowa County certainly is a very dynamic place in terms of the people who live here, the sort of demographic transition that's taking place, the issues, and you know, both because of things internal and external, I don't know, the grouping of people into different cliques and beliefs and it has affected us where relationships are the key to trust. They take time. And when we were just getting started and we had a smaller staff, program, impact, a smaller suite of relationships to manage, you know, we were able to make steady progress with that because we had trust and we had sort of alignment, and we could have difficult conversations and agree that maybe the disagreements were really about strategies and tactics of what we might do, not about the goals or the values that we held. Now that we're bigger, both as a staff and a program and addressing a lot of different issues, including housing and energy, but also Alyssa, who is up here, hey Alyssa, and runs our biggest program, our forest program, which now spans multiple counties. Right now you're talking about a different challenge of relationship building and trust. And that's then complicated by the fact that you've got an overlay of, you know, some of the things that have been triggers for the conversations this summer have been words that we use in a certain way and people outside of Wallowa County use in a different way, and they get misinterpreted, right? And the significance of those words, how they're used elsewhere, are then interpreted as being what we intend to do.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the energy program is a good one where, you know, one of the words that triggered people was that we're working on a microgrid, right? Microgrid is not, it's an old word. It's been around a long time. Wallowa County used to be 100% self-sufficient in energy production. But now it's aligned with a sort of progressive climate change agenda. That if you look on the web, which people in the county have done, they'll see a whole bunch of other things aligned with that agenda that they see as being foreign and the antithesis to what we have always believed here in Wallowa County about sort of the importance of place and community and connection to land. And it's taken time because we don't have the relationships to say that's not what we meant. Yes, we use the same word, but that's not what we meant. And And one of the things we've been talking about, we actually talked about it as a priority. It's another reason why I'm here as a priority for 2024 is we have to double down on our commitment to having more of these conversations, right? Because we did get to a point that as we grew and as sort of the tasks of managing, developing, implementing our programs became more and more demanding, we spent less time having these conversations. And we can't do that, right? We can't be effective unless we commit enough time to having the conversations, to the relationships, the trust, the understanding. So
I'm gonna ask you one more follow-up. I just was curious about, do you have, what's the word I'm looking for, an explanation or a thought in your head about what caused, why are we having less of those conversations now than we did, say, 20 years ago or 15 years ago or even 10 years ago? What's changed in your mind? Is there one or two things that you could point to?
I mean, so, I mean, personally, I can point to a lot of things. But I, you know, a lot of resources are a lot bigger than when I got here. So there's a lot of different responsibilities on me. I mean, one of the things that, like, it wasn't intentional for me. It was about committing myself to this community. You know, I took the job at Wallowa Resources. I became the head of the Wallowa Youth Soccer League. I worked on the school board. I was a deacon at the community church. I had a lot of different points of connection with the community. And so people didn't relate to me just because I had the Wallowa Resources hat on, right? They knew me as the coach of their kids or a fellow member of their congregation, right? Or somebody on the school board. And I don't do that anymore.
Those
right?
kids grew up, right?
Well, the kids grew up, right? And as will our resources began to be seen, you know, in the state and in the region as an interesting example of a community-based institution that was really trying to address challenging issues. We got invited to participate on state and regional things. And we thought it was important at that time to try to elevate the voice and perspective and values of a small isolated population in the West, because we're often not heard.
Right.
But it comes at a cost of spending time here, right? And we're gonna sort of double down on trying to have these conversations here.
Right. Chantay, I think when we first met and had the conversation about this panel, of all of us sitting here, you by far have the largest group of, the large staff, a lot of people that, and it's stressful work. I think a lot of us understand that mental health care is, man, it's an important and valuable caring skill, but it takes a lot of toll on folks. But when we talked, you know, I think what was interesting to me is how are you dealing with some of these breakdowns in communication and some of the things that you're seeing? You spoke a little bit about it with, you know, trying to give employee feedback, but what other things are you seeing that are really pulling this issue to the forefront for you at work?
So, gosh, yeah, it's just, can I reflect a little bit
Please do,
on
yeah.
what Neil said? We are living parallel lives, which I sort of suspected that we were, but it's interesting, you know, in 2010, I came back to Wallowa County. And when I was working at the Center for Wellness at Wallowa River House, I believe that there were 57 employees total. Now we have 105. And we have 17 different programs that we run under the roof of Wallowa Valley Center for Wellness. So a lot of diversity, a lot of different programming, a lot of state mandates and metrics that we have to meet. I can tell you from a work perspective, unfortunately, the state of Oregon is killing us with a workforce issue called paperwork. And I'm not joking. I mean, if you have 17 different programs and they all have 10 different metrics that you have to collect data on, what happens as a business model is your business becomes super, super, super top heavy because it takes 3 times the people to do all that data collecting and analysis and crunching and for, you know, the 30 people that deliver the widgets. And so you have 70% of the organization doing the numbers crunching for 30% of the widget providers. So as a business major, that's a super upside down, ridiculous model. And so it becomes this rat race of having to keep up with the funding and the people. And, you know, we want to always assure that we're doing a good job in the community of providing great paying jobs with great benefits. And it just becomes this grant chasing sort of ridiculous cycle that we go through. So that's kind of in my mind, the bigger picture for work, but on a smaller level, or maybe a bigger level even, is technology. So as much as I love technology, and yes, I have 1,000 apps on my stupid phone and, you know, all of that business. I really believe, you know, I think back to, 2000, and I was I've always had like 3 jobs, and one of my jobs was a bartender at one time. And I was bartending, and my best friend was sitting at the bar, and she had a phone, and it was the first BlackBerry. And she held it up and she's like, "Mark my words, this is going to be the demise of us as humans." And I'm like, "Oh, God, you're such a downer, right? You're such a Debbie Downer. I mean, come on. Have another cocktail." But she really was on to something back then, right? And then MySpace happened, and then Facebook, and then, you know, Twitter and all the other gajillion apps. And we spend more time isolated on our phones, thinking that we are doing a phenomenal job communicating. But think of everything that's lost. Think of that human touch, that eye contact. You know, I can sit here and read your body language, and I think you're sort of interested. I'm hoping because you're nodding. That's a good sign. See, I'm reading that. But we lose so much in human interaction. And I honestly think, again, back to that 5 years ago and that Brene Brown's speech, and you know, what was being lost then was that human connection. And then the pandemic hit, and then we were all on the web. And now we do these hybrid meetings where half of us are on the web and half of us are in person. Really? You know? I know, and I'm not trying to be offensive. But I'm saying that we lose that human touch, that human connection. So it becomes harder and harder and harder to explain words that are misrepresented, right? I mean, I was accused in the paper of building a mental health monopoly. First, that's hilarious. A monopoly in mental health, it doesn't really go. And really, is it such a bad thing that there's a monopoly on mental health? I don't know. So it was a piece that was taken from something that I had said, that it was not able to communicate directly, eye to eye, person to person, right? And that was really misconstrued. So I think technology in my book is really starting to degrade the human connection. And it makes me sad. I was talking to a 14-year-old, and I said, "Oh my gosh, you got to just pick up the phone and, you know, have a conversation with her." He's like, "What?" And I said, "Pick up the phone and have a conversation." He's like, "Oh, no. That is a confrontation." I was like, "Oh, a confrontation? You think that's a confrontation? To pick up the phone and ask her to prom?" Wow. Okay, so we have got some work to do. We have got some work to do as parents. We've got some work to do as grandparents, as a larger community. We have got to break this down. We have got to stop this negative cycle that a conversation is now seen in young people's eyes as a confrontation if they can't have it via text. It's really sad to me. Debbie Downer, I know.
You know, that calls to mind is, particularly with social media is, and again, you're the expert on this, but you know, if somebody posts talking about our micro bubbles and the things that we do, where everybody reinforces their own belief system, and you have something like an Instagram post or Facebook or formerly known as Twitter, where you post something and then you get a dopamine rush if somebody responds to your post, right? So if you say something super inflammatory, there's almost a built-in incentive to build up those bubbles and keep us separate, because now we're getting a hormone rush that's saying, oh, it's addictive. So I'm curious with, you know, again, your clinical background.
15 cigarettes a day.
Seriously, yeah.
That's what it equates to.
What level?
It equates to smoking, the dopamine that's received from those likes and that social media and that instant gratification is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day on your physical health.
So if you think about somebody who is posting something that is extremely, you know, whatever their belief is, and their belief, I'm not questioning the belief, but that they're getting that reinforcement of all these folks that are responding. I'm gonna use a quick little story. A couple days ago, I was driving home and I thought, I've never done the Tim's weather report thing. I'm gonna road report. I'm gonna just do the roads were nuts and I'm gonna do my service to the community. And I posted a picture from my street. And Elkhorn Media replied to the post and said, we wanna use this picture. And sure enough, they posted the picture and within minutes, I'm checking and going, how many people are liking this? How many people are liking this? And I went, oh, shut off your phone, man, this is bad, you know? And this is, I wasn't doing this to get attention, but it was interesting because I was watching those little numbers like, you know, I wish it was bank account, but it wasn't, so I work here. So,
I think that, this leads to the fact that somebody said earlier today, we are Homo sapiens sapiens.
right.
And so we are animals as well. And part of how we survived was to have a negative set point. So there's a noise, it must be something dangerous, I need to go into survival instinct. Well, we just had this beautiful listening session. And what we uncovered is this underlying angst about even the survival of our species. So what we're dealing with is this soup that we're swimming in of anxiety. And so as Homo sapiens, what we do is, number one, that negative set point, how it comes out is suspicion, judgment, making assumptions, making people wrong, you know, both sides of the aisle. Either it is that, you know, the woke culture is going to, what is it called when they isolate you out? Cancel you, yes, cancel you. Or, you know, it's the same on the right and the left, at different avenues. And so what we are dealing with is we are in survival instinct. And in survival instinct, we move into fight, flight, freeze, or appease. And so, you know, the fight, we know what that is. The flight is anxiety and worry. The freeze is having this sense of disassociation, numbness, depression, or I can't do anything about it. I'm not going to engage in anything. I'm just going to hide away. And then you have your epidemic of isolation and loneliness. And so to be able to just understand that, oh, this is who we are as Homo sapiens sapiens, and what are the skill sets that we need to learn in order to come back to self-regulation. And part of that is what Christine taught us last night with these breathing exercises. There's so many ways that we can come back, and that's one of the skill sets to learn through building our social and emotional intelligence, that we are animals. We can't will ourselves away from this sense of survival instinct. There's other ways that we can have compassion for ourselves and understand, wow, I need to do something to come back from my reptilian brainstem into my neocortex so that I can think rationally and creatively and engage. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about building those skills so that we can engage in community. So a phone call does not feel threatening anymore. But we have to understand we are in survival mode most of the time. I think anymore.
Beth, will you give us a piece? You gave us, well, like, but you didn't go to a piece.
Yeah, so a piece would be more like, well, I could talk about it in the political realm. Whatever it is that our leader who says that they're gonna take care of us is going to do, I'm gonna go along with that. I'm going to, if there's a bully in the room, I'm going to do all of my power to survive by appeasing that bully, by appeasing the person that has the largest microphone at the time, and go along with it in order to survive myself.
So I know, Beth, you do coaching work in addition to your own, work with your ministry. I'm curious, you talked a little bit about it, but because you also are, Homo sapiens sapien, what do you do to keep from going off the rails or for getting really frustrated and stressed? We can talk about how do we serve the community, but what do you do for yourself? What kind of tricks in addition to breathing would you offer as a coach?
Well, I do think breathing is like, we all have to do it. So why not develop some practices? We have this vagus nerve that goes from here and it goes into all of our, everything that's inside of us, and how we pick up. So our brains are constantly saying safe, unsafe, safe, unsafe, safe, unsafe, safe, unsafe. That's how we've survived as animals. And so we pick up on that safe, unsafe through our bodies, through the environment in which we find ourselves, and through what's happening inside of us. So even a sense of just a little check before going in a meeting. What's my feeling level right now? What's happening with my breathing? Can I feel my feet on the floor? Can I feel the air touching my skin? There's this sense of calming down when we kind of do the interior, but also, can I see where the exit of the door is so that I know I can be safe? We can do it in community by creating covenants of how are we going to relate to one another. And I think you do this brilliantly. You do this at Fishtrap Fireside when you say 5 minutes and I'm gonna come up and I'm gonna pull you off the stage. And how it was done today in our listening session. I think now as leaders that one of the things we can do the best is just to create containers of safety so that our souls can come out and play. And that work is, 12-step groups do it really well, by the way. And that's why all that healing can happen. And for us to be able to heal the planet, we have to be about that healing work, both within ourselves and in the communities in which we find ourselves.
Thank you. Nils, I'm gonna pick on you again for a second. As much as you feel comfortable sharing this, what are your personal obstacles in creating spaces? What are the biggest challenges you face, or what kind of things do you have to think about or overcome as you're walking into, whether it's a contentious situation like, a community listening session where very little listening is happening, or even a one-on-one feedback session with a board member or a staff member? What kind of, what obstacles do you have to be conscious of?
I mean, some of you may find this funny when I say this, but it's true. My natural state is an introvert. So for me, this is performative. I gear up to do public and then I need time.
I resemble that.
And And, you know, I mean, I was able to reflect on it a lot more through COVID, right? Because I was really happy. Like, hey, I get to be on my own. So, you know, so that, but I will also say that, you know, I mean, one of the things why my wife and Celia and our family has been here so long is we love this community. We love the relationships we have. And I do gain a lot from one-on-one and small group interactions, but the bigger ones I really need to prepare for and get my head in the right place, and then I need time to recover from that whole exercise. So that would be number one. I would say the second thing is trying to understand the change that's taking place in our community. Because we have grown and because we've been thinking about many other things than the change that's happening here, it really was only through a series of conversations over the last 24 months and really elevated after some of our housing meetings and energy meetings where I asked some of the people that had expressed anger or opposition or criticism to what we were doing. I asked them after those meetings if they would meet with me one-on-one. And they were really productive meetings. They were good examples of sort of polite, respectful exchanges where we weren't, as Christina taught us, you know, trying to win an argument. We were just trying to share where we were coming from so that we could understand each other better. And one of the things sort of that really hit home for me, which I think that sort of ties into what Beth said is, you know, there's a sense of anxiety about the rate of change that's taking place. And it's elevated by the sense that individuals don't feel like they have control or influence or agency over that change. And in that conversation, I heard over and over that issue, right? And it again, it's part of why we had the conversations in Wallowa Resources, right? That it's really important that all of us that are doing something are trying to be as inclusive and as transparent as possible about sort of what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we think about things, so that there isn't a disconnect between the citizens and people that we're hoping will benefit from this and what we're doing, and that we remain always open to the fact that, like, my idea may not be the best idea to do this, right? Or my idea may take us a little farther away from where the core center of values are in the community, and we need to recalibrate and adjust. And that was, you know, like there were certain lessons that I've had through my career. The most important one probably was there was a farmer forester in Norway when I used to work for the Norwegian Forestry Society, and he took me to the airport because I was going to Botswana to work for the Ministry of Forestry in Botswana, and he said, "Nils, remember when you get down there, you're a very good forester, you're very prepared for this job, but even the lowest forest ranger in the Ministry of Forestry in Botswana knows more about the forest in Botswana than you do, right? And you need to learn from them. It's not your job to teach them, right? You need to learn from them about how best to get this job done." And, you know, that's something I've taken with me all the time. And I think it's important that we're all open to learning from each other in every interaction. Right. And I think that's also what you were getting at last night.
So just to kind of summarize, I hear two main points here. One is you gotta be paying attention to what's going on in your own self. you know, I can completely relate to, my staff, and my poor mom knows this, you know, after summer Fishtrap, the edict is, don't talk to me. For at least 2 days, maybe a couple months, but don't talk to me. And it's very much being aware of, I need that, because if you do, I'm not at my best. So being aware of your own inner needs and self-care and checking in with your body, as Beth indicated. But the second thing is really about listening, isn't it? It's listening without an agenda, it seems like, much like the exercise this morning. So again, that's so much of what your work is, Chantay. I'm curious about the pressures of modeling that with your staff as well. I mean, you are also, again, a Homo sapien sapien, correct? What do you do, and what kind of, the same kind of question for Nils, you've got your own needs, and how do you make sure you take care of yourself so that you're able to fully listen and model that? And, you know, so that, but on the flip side, can you talk about a time where you maybe didn't? Yeah.
We have all day.
Just one time.
Oh my gosh. It's such an interesting question, and, you know, I think back to my husband, who is much wiser and funnier than I am. He likes to remind me that all the time. He wrote on a notebook, that I had after a meeting in huge letters, "Go slow." And I was like, oh, right. I knew I had totally blown the meeting. It was with some community partners, and he happened to be present in representing another community agency. And so he and I were sort of sitting across the table from one another. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. So my biggest Achilles heel is that my brain works at about 900,000 miles a minute. And so I can anticipate, or I think I can anticipate the conversation. I have the solution and I have the answer before you can even finish your sentence. And that is really rude of me. And I have to constantly remind myself, and oftentimes, if I'm entering a very difficult conversation, I will write "go slow" at the top of my paper or agenda to remind me to be open and transparent and to give room for listening. What's odd is that I'm a marriage and family therapist. You'd think I have this listening thing down pat, right? Well, when I put on my therapist hat, I'm a totally different person than when I have on my ED hat and I'm sitting in a room. So I have learned that people also have different hats that they wear when they come to the conversation. So being really mindful of what hat that is, and maybe they're a little under the weather as well and not quite themselves. So we have to really give a lot of space and a lot of understanding for all those different hats and personalities and ways of communicating, because we all communicate very differently. But I would say that was a big wake-up call for me.
Can I just jump in real quick?
Please do, I jump.
Because it reminds me of, you know, one of the early things that Wallowa County and the Nez Tribe and Wallowa Resources and many others did was form something called the community planning process back in 2000. That was an early version of what today is called the Forest Collaborative. But through the entire process, we had this mantra: you've got to go slow to go fast, right? You can't, you know, we sort of knew where we wanted to get, but it was really important that we took the time and created the circles to hear everybody and make sure that everybody was on board with this sort of goal and this vision of where we wanted to get to. In Zimbabwe, they used to say, "Slowly, slowly, catchy monkey."
I'd like to add to this too. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Ken Wilber. He's an integral philosopher. I love how he talks about there's the I space, there's the you space, and there's the we space. The I space is what's happening inside of me, what's my personality, what's my history, how have I experienced trauma in my life, all the stuff that makes up who I am. And then there's the you space, and the you space is the other person that has all of that going on inside of them. So can I first have compassion for my I space And then be able to step into the you space and to not see you as a you, but to actually step into your space and to see the world through what your history, your perspective, your personality, and how you see the world. And then, that's a growth in compassion. And that's what we're talking about here, growing in the capacity to have compassion and understanding for others and building trust. And then like the graduate level of this is the we space. And this is the work of what pastors do all the time. It's how can we enter into a space where not my personal preferences or your personal preferences get the top billing, but actually the we space is something that's beyond all of our personal preferences that call us to a larger vision. So, and when we get to that, magic happens. You can feel it. There's a resonance in the room when we can step into that mystical, sacramental we space. And that's when people like Peter Senge would say, that's when creativity blossoms. That's when we come to ahas. That's when we can begin addressing the complexity of the world in which we find ourselves. So again, it's building the capacity to move out from I to you to we.
So Beth, you are such, I feel like you set the bar very high for, which I love. I mean, I think that's the goal. So grounded back into the Homo sapiens sapiens, I'm gonna walk around with that. We're all human beings. We talked about that at the beginning. What gives you hope locally in our own community and our greater, larger earth bounds people community? What, with all this talk of division, what gives you hope?
I love the fact that we have to talk to one another. When you're in a big city, you can remain anonymous. You can put things out there and be nasty and cruel, and it doesn't matter. But it's a little bit harder when you are in a small community and everybody seems to know everybody else. And so there's an invitation to, or even more of a sense of we need to do this in order to survive, to work on these issues. When I moved here 18 months ago, and I did the same thing that you did when you first came here, and a lot of conversations with a lot of people. And one of the questions that I would ask is, if you could wave your magic wand and change one thing about this county, what would it be? And I kid you not, every single person I talked to gave me the same answer. And it was, we seem to have grown more divisive. And I would like to know how we can come back together again. Now, that gives me hope.
I want to ask you the same question, Chantay. What gives you hope right now?
On a small scale, you asked a question earlier about what we are doing to set examples in our work about being more inclusive and opening up the conversation. And it's a super small thing, but I've been leaving my cell phone and my computer at my desk anytime that I go into a meeting with anyone. And instead of sending an email or a chat to someone, I will get up and walk down the hall and knock on the door and have that chat person to person, because I'm trying to set this example of really meaningful connection. And so what I love is 2 days ago, I had one of our employees get up, walk down the hall, and have a conversation with me. And we were standing in my office having this great conversation, and we were laughing and carrying on. And I looked at him, I said, "Thanks for walking down the hall to meet with me." And he said, "Well, I noticed you've been doing that a lot lately."
Wow.
And I was like, yes. So that really gave me hope, right? It was like one tiny little thing, but that gives me hope on a really small level. On a community level, I have to brag on Nils. So the first meeting of the housing group was held at Hearts for Health. And it was standing room only. And boy, oh boy, was it heated. Whew. And he handled it magically. Everyone that facilitated that meeting that evening handled it magically. Since then, in progressive meetings, they've become less and less and less heated, which tells me, right? It's obvious. The more you have face-to-face conversations with each other, the less confrontational it is, and the more conversational it becomes. And so it was a spectacular example of how, you know, everyone is gearing up, or what do we say here in the county, gunning for bear, right? They're all ready to have this fight. And they have the fight, and then they're realizing, well, that was
dumb.
that was silly.
Yeah.
And so the next time around, they come together and it becomes less and less confrontational. So really excited about that. That gives me a lot of hope. It also gives me a lot of hope that it seems like we have this community of giving and loving and caring and commitment, and we see it over and over, and it played out, you know, in 2020 with me personally and my son and all the entire community wrapping around us, to the candlelight vigil that we have on Suicide Awareness Day on September 10th, and the 500 bags that we put out this year, and the community coming together to acknowledge an epidemic that we've had in our own community of 9 completed suicides. And so when I see people holding hands and singing and walking together, that gives me a lot of hope.
It's interesting, the modeling piece, and I wanna, you know, commend you that too. I think that modeling has downstream effects. You know, I said something at the beginning the other day, and I believe this, that, somebody told me once, the higher up the tree the monkey goes, the more you can see its butt.
Well, that's true.
And it's true, and it's a way of actually reminding, and I think this applies to everybody here, you're all leaders. And especially when you have the privilege of representing an organization like Wallowa Resources and Center for Wellness and Fishtrap, you have to be aware that people are paying attention. And I want to commend you on that, so I would not downplay for either of you the small things and the big things and the downstream effects they have. So I'm gonna close this before we open to questions. I want to ask Nils the same thing. What gives you hope?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, and so I'm a hopeful and optimistic person by nature, so I gotta wake up hopeful and optimistic, and but you know, I would start with the conversations I had with individuals in the community after those heated meetings, where we could meet in smaller groups. And it was very obvious then that there was still friendship and respect. And the more we talked, an understanding that we actually did have a fair bit of alignment in terms of our vision and values, and that there had been misunderstanding and confusion about the language and the words, and it was set in this context that's different, everybody's different sort of sense of fear or anxiety. And so that gave me hope, right? The more we have these conversations, if we take it in ourselves to put down phones and stop the meetings and have one-on-one coffees and beers and walks and small group conversations, that there's less division than it appears to many of us, just sort of at a higher level when we're not engaged in it, or when the only interaction is in a large group where people come loaded for bear, right? And so that gives me a lot of hope. And I would agree, you know, both on the housing meeting and the energy meeting recently, we saw, you know, an initial significant contention and division, and then it slowly came together into I think a more positive place for the people that had spent a lot of time working on it, but for the community as a whole. And the third thing I would just say is that it's exciting to see younger people in Wallowa County stepping up.
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh, so what we're gonna do now is open it up to questions. Janice is gonna represent, there's some questions already online.
Just a couple comments.
Okay, just quick, let me again give you directions. Questions start with what? Yes, they do, and also who, what, why, where, and how. If you have an anecdote and you can keep it to under 10 seconds, I'm fine with that, but comments and things, let's make room for questions and we'll go from there, so. But we will, because these folks, online have committed to being part of this community, I wanna give a little voice to them, so Janice, do you wanna?
Yeah, just a
Yeah.
couple comments here one from Cameron. We expect our computers, phones, accomplish things rapidly, instantly. Relationships and understanding people does not work that way, has never worked that way. And then coming from Mike, this is why people are more attuned and more likely to remember bad news. And that was from earlier when we were talking about these.
Right.
comments.
And I would just add to that, right, and I had a friend from high school that was the head of algorithmic science at Netflix and knows all about that world, and we talk a lot about the algorithms that are driving what we watch and what we read, right, and it's reinforcing these divisions, right, because it just continues to drive into your space the things you already believe or have suggested you like or that appeal to you. And so we're losing the breadth of perspective that's really important to all of us, to understanding the world we're in and the issues we're trying to deal with. And we all need to try to resist that, right? Or understand that that's what's happening and then consciously seek out other sources of information and opinion.
Right. Anybody have any questions? Yes, Mike.
Reflecting on the experience of the energy forum that took place and other events recently in the community, I mean, it seems apparent that some people are driven by, I'm gonna call it misinformation, disinformation. They have a particular belief and understanding that is not necessarily grounded in what was meant, what was communicated, the actual black and white words. They're bringing associations to that. And I think that oftentimes those associations seem to come from social media, wherever they're taking in information. So one of the needs, it seems, is the need for what's called media literacy, being able to be critical about information that is coming into you and being able to be critical about it. So I see it as a huge, tremendous need. But the question is who is the appropriate convener of that kind of education? Is it the schools? Is it other community leaders? And also, how do you motivate people to want to be critical about what they're hearing, as opposed to falling into the trap that we all fall into of confirmation bias, of just looking for things that confirm what we already believe? How do we overcome that confirmation bias? How do we help people be critical about where their information is coming, looking at the sources, looking at the motivations? One quick anecdote.
I'm actually gonna, yeah, okay. Wowzers. Okay, that was a really long question, but there was a how. I'm gonna, Beth, do you have a question?
I'm gonna,
Well, oh my goodness gracious, we could have other whole panel on just that one question.
And we're going to shortly, by the way. so-
I think everything that you brought up to me strikes one chord with me, and that is why? Why is this person needing to do what you're explaining? And to me, you know, I think back to the basic psychology of bullies. Why do bullies bully? You know, and so why does this person need to stand up and, you know, shoot down the messenger? Why do they feel that need to assert themselves in that way? And instead of being a critical thinker and sitting there and really trying to be thoughtful and mindful about a decent response. And instead just standing up and sort of having this vomit of words that are oftentimes hurtful. And I think there's really basic needs there, human Homo sapiens sapien needs that are not being met for that individual person. And, so psychologically speaking, I always want to understand what's the root cause or what's the root drive or motivation that that person is standing up and feels the need to blurt out something like that in a meeting or on social media or whatever. And I think it's because of isolation and a lack of human connection and a lack of feedback, right? We get positive and negative. I think it's all positive because I'm a positive poly too and an extrovert. So I like a lot of feedback because why? That informs me both positively, negatively, neutrally, how I am as a person. When we're communicating mostly by technology, we're not getting that connective tissue that's built and those synapses are starting to die, right? And so we're needing to fulfill them in other ways. So that dopamine rush now comes from standing up and blurting out in a meeting and throwing our fist up in the air and yelling. That's a dopamine rush. So to me, psychologically, it has more to do with a root of why that person's doing it than that they're doing it to begin with.
Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
just real, I mean, one of the things that I think is important in the context of, sort of community conversation and community building, is to bring all these conversations down to the level of the community, because it's harder for misinformation to take root when we're talking about something that we actually can see, touch, feel, know, right? And as much as we can do that, I think we're gonna be better off. Just on a side note, like I think about that question all the time, and I remember back to my high school, we actually had really good high school history and other teachers that always were teaching us, right? Think about the bias of the person who wrote this, right? What are they trying to have you believe, or where are they coming from? And seek out sort of other perspectives. And hopefully our schools are doing that again still today, but it's important that we're all thinking about that.
I do want to point out in your resource, everybody got a resource list of books and videos and things included in that. And I think it came from our friends at Forever Angels, is a list of really good media sources that their mission is to weed out the extremes and do some things that are really pointing out, what are the sources, what are motivated by left or right point of view solely. So check out that list. There's some good resources there. Yeah, Angie.
How do we, if it weren't for the newsletter from Fishtrap or just SETI Center, we don't know, we don't get information like we used to. It's just like our church, put it there. A lot of the people are on Facebook, so that's where they tell that they've been sick or this or that. And the prayer chain is just like now. And we have our paper. Our internet was out for 2 days. This meeting could have been canceled. How do we get back? Is there a way back for people? If you don't have a computer and a credit card, you can't do anything anymore. It's like with Frank. We couldn't sign him up. He wouldn't have been able to pay. We're missing a lot of people when those are those, but that's what it is. To sign up, you had to do it online.
Right.
You don't have how do we get back?
Yeah, and there's obstacles there too. We used to all get mail, right?
Yeah.
The cost for an organization like us to mail something anymore it's prohibitive. We can't do print newsletters because we have a mailing list of 5,000 people. So you could see what that would do, right? So it's obstacles, yeah. What happened to phone chains? So-and-so's, well, phoning is an aggressive act, okay? I'm sorry, yeah, so is there, I want to check in online, or do you have any questions, Janice?
Just comments, I can read.
Just, yeah, then we'll need to wrap this up because we have to set for the next session.
Okay, Mike's is an amazing series of questions. All of the above, schools introduce media literacy, community groups to reach out to anyone that will learn. Mike chimes in with, just a bunch. But people have to want to learn media literacy, which is why it's so important to try to break out of our silos. Omega says it would be great if community leaders integrate this knowledge and these skills into their leadership styles. Making that part of our community culture can strengthen our relationships and problem-solving abilities. Gwen says there are so many nuances that contribute to this conversation. Our lived experiences inform our experiences. Systemic racism drive inequities and divide our pathways to come together. Mike says, at the risk of touting my own profession, evidence is beginning to mount that communities in so-called news deserts tend to experience increased polarization.
Excellent. So I do, let me add one time, we need to wrap it up. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we're wrapping this up, but I do want you to think about the next session, which is depolarization.
Right.
How do we see? So, but anyway.
Yeah, I want to say, just a couple of quick things. You, obviously, we can continue this conversation in the room and online. Zoom folks, we are not going to shut the screen down, but I'm gonna turn the camera off so we can reset the stage and move cameras and you don't get seasick when we do this. But please continue to stay online and just stay connected. We're gonna reset for Braver Angels in about 10 minutes, and I want to give everybody time to get up and get the wiggles out, carry on the conversation. I want to, oh my gosh, thank you. I know Chantay has to jet out to Code to go watch kids play games in really cold weather. Nils, I appreciate, I know you're on the far side of a tough week of viral things. And Beth, how lucky are we that she moved here? Can we all thank whatever. Can you please? And then get the wiggles out, we're gonna be back in about 10-15 minutes. Go get yourself some coffee and thank you so much.